Welcome to the Photo Banter podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gagne, and on today's podcast, I speak with photographer Brad Trent. Brad has worked with clients such as Variety, Time Magazine, Pepsi, Esquire, and HBO, to name a few. Brad has photographed notable people such as Barack Obama, Spike Lee, Tony Bennett, and Patti Smith, to name a few. In this interview, I speak to Brad about growing up in Canada, where he started his photography career before making the jump to New York City. I also speak to Brad about his approach to portraiture and how he handles challenging shoots, such as his experience photographing legendary musician Patti Smith in the middle of Penn Station in New York City. Brad is someone who has a wealth of knowledge and experience in the photography industry, so I was excited to get a chance to speak with him about his work. So I hope you enjoy, and thanks so much for listening. Well, Brad Trent, welcome to the podcast. A long time coming. Excited to have you. Our mutual friend, Cheyenne Esquire, he's been telling me for months. He's like, you got to reach out to Brad. You got to reach out to Brad. So excited to talk to you, man. How did you and Cheyenne meet, by the way? I was just kind of curious.
Oh, we actually met through a musician friend of mine. He had a woman named Kate Tucker. She's a singer-songwriter, and she was working for another friend of ours, another photographer friend of ours who ran a production company. And they had Cheyenne in their little quiver of photographers out in LA. And she was telling me all about this photographer, Cheyenne. Cheyenne, you got to check out Cheyenne. And at the same time, she was talking to my wife, who's a photo editor at the Wall Street Journal. You got to check out Cheyenne. And so Ronnie Weil, she actually gave Cheyenne a couple of gigs based on, our connection through Kate. And I don't know, a few months later, he ended up in LA and we ended up in the same bar. And Kate was there and Jesse English, the other photographer was there. And I ran across the room and I yelled at him, Ashkarnia!
Yeah, that's what he told me. He's like, ask Brad the first thing he said to him, I guess. Yeah. That's what he said.
We've been friends ever since. I mean, he's something, that guy.
No, definitely. He gets after it. And looking at your website, I was excited to talk to you for a lot of reasons. But I saw before becoming a photographer, you spent some time working on a sod farm. I was kind of curious, how was that experience? And I was just working on a sod farm. Seems kind of interesting.
It's probably the only real job I've had besides working at a Safeway store. But it was the first job I ever had. I mean, I was still in high school. I worked an entire summer stacking sod back in Edmonton, Alberta. It was the worst job I ever had. It convinced me that manual labor was not for me.
Yeah. But then looking at your recent Variety cover, you're still doing a lot of manual labor. You guys brought like 12,000 pounds of lights onto the roof, which we'll get into.
Yeah, nobody ever told me photography would be worse than stacking sod. But
you're stocking acute packs. What so where did you grow up in Alberta, Canada? I think that's where you mentioned.
I grew up all over Canada, but I mean the formative years and where I started photography was just outside of Edmonton in a little suburb called St. Albert. I moved there in the 9th grade, and I didn't know. I mean, I'd been drawn to photography. I mean, when I look back at it, I was drawn to photography from a very early age. Mostly because I was a sickly child, and I spent a lot of time in doctors' offices, and there would always be, Life magazine and Look and those type of photo magazines that, we didn't get in Canada. I mean, my parents didn't subscribe to them because it wasn't their thing, but I'd see them in the doctor's office. And I always was drawn to just the visuals, the photography in these magazines. And years later, I ended up working for a lot of those photographers when I moved to New York. I mean, that was the connection to photography. But when I moved to Edmonton, I was literally on the playground one day, and I pressed up against a brick wall with a camera that I'd never seen before. And he was like, this far from the wall, and I didn't know what he was doing. I walked up, and he had a macro lens on an old Pentax, and he was shooting ants in a crack between the bricks. And I thought it was the coolest shit I'd ever seen. I mean, my photography my mom had a Brownie Hawkeye. That was the only camera we had in the house at that time. So in the 9th grade, I saw this guy, and I hung out, and I didn't know anybody because I was new to the school. So it was a way to at least meet somebody. And he was on the yearbook committee, and then I ended up, making friends with him and doing that. And that's what got me into photography. I mean, all through high school, I did that. That's where I got going. It never really occurred to me to be a career, though. I mean, again, in Western Canada, a photographer was the guy that, took the family portraits and the weddings and things like that. So he didn't really, I had no aspirations of doing that. I was actually geared up to be an architect because a high school guidance counselor said, yeah, you should do this. You were good at math and you were good at, physics and things like that. So they try to pigeonhole you into something. And I didn't know what the hell an architect was. I mean, I spent 3 years, taking higher math and physics in high school and basically hating it, and applying to the University of Alberta engineering school, not really knowing what the hell any of that meant. And I bailed on that at the last minute because there was no way I wanted to be an architect. I mean, I saw what some of these guys that were going to be architects looked like. They were wearing Le Corbusier t-shirts, and they were, that was their life. For me, it was cool, and I still love it.
Yep.
The architect part, but I couldn't have hacked 7 years of, higher education and ended up, designing tract homes in Western Canada. I mean, that would have blown my brains out.
Yeah, definitely. And when you kind of started shooting photos, like what kind of stuff were you interested in photographing? Like looking at your work now, like most of your work's like portraiture based, and was that kind of always your interest in photography from the get-go?
Well, again, back in high school, that's what I did. I mean, it was because I was more or less, I was a quiet kid that was just trying to get to meet people. We moved around a lot as a kid. And when I ended up in Edmonton and discovering photography and discovering that I could take pictures of, people in high school and give them prints, that was a great way to make friends. So I was always drawn to shooting people, but not thinking that was anything other. I just like doing it. I like the sort of instant gratification of taking a picture of somebody and then they liked it, and then it was a payoff in that way to make friends. When I bailed on the whole architect idea, I didn't really know what I was going to do, but another friend of mine from high school was taking this photography program in Edmonton, and he said, you should apply. And I did. And it was a 2-year technical school program at the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology. And that's when, okay, I could do this. I still had no plan on where it was going to take me. I mean, again, I'm still in Edmonton, which is, it's not the center of anything, not back then. We're talking the late 70s. I mean, the ultimate idea back then would be, okay, I'll do this and then I'll move to Toronto and I'll make it there, because, you weren't going to do it there. But as it turned out, I finished photo school. I ended up moving to Calgary because a guy offered me a job. And it was a typical small town photography type business where you did everything. The very first day I worked for this guy, he said, okay, there's the gear, there's the van, drive to this show home on the south end of town, and you're shooting a carpet ad.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, okay, shit, all the stuff I learned in school about architecture photography is going to come and play now, because here I am with a 4x5 and a bunch of old Bowens monolights, and I got to shoot a carpet ad in a show house.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. And I did, honestly, I nailed it. I shot the shit out of that house. But, that's what we did at that first gig that I had, that first job that I had. Everything from that to, shooting oil rigs and gas plants and construction sites, and anybody that had a gig, you would shoot it.
Wow.
And on the side, I would shoot my friends, and then I started shooting for the local modeling school, which happened to be John Casablanca's elite modeling school. And then I'm shooting girls, and it's like, oh, this is great. This is this is why you become a photographer, right? I mean, you're like, I'm in Edmonton, I'm making money, and then the guy that I was working for, he went out of business, but I got all of his clients.
Oh,
so
wow.
now I was I think 21, and I was making basically as much money as you could make in Calgary, Alberta. I found out what the most expensive photographer in town was charging, which at that time was $600 a day, and my rate was $750.
Damn, so you're
19, I guess that'd be like 1980.
Yep.
I was making money as a photographer, shooting oil rigs and gas plants and construction sites and doing what you do. And on the side, I was shooting models, for the modeling school. And it ended up being that, okay, that's great. I love that. But, I can't keep on. I didn't want to be the guy in Calgary shooting oil rigs and gas plants. My girlfriend, who was a model, got taken by Elite to New York. So we came to New York to check it out in February of 82. And Elite said, great. They wanted her, which meant that I was moving to New York. I trashed the great business and all this. And then I moved to New York in June of 82.
What was like moving from Canada to New York? Did you enjoy New York from the get-go? You've obviously been there a long time. What was kind of your initial kind of reaction moving from Canada to New York City? It must have been kind of a big jump, I would imagine.
Well, the biggest place I'd ever been before that was Toronto. No comparison. I mean, this was New York in 82. New York was still pretty much a shithole in 82. I mean, it was just coming out of the big recession of the 70s. It was still grungy and dirty, and and it was great. I mean, believe me, the first time you come to New York back then, it's like everything is just over the top and big and huge. Plus, I had a pretty by Elite. So John Casablancas was hooking me up right from the beginning. And when we came originally a few months earlier, and he set me up to see some photographers. And again, this was to come to look and get assisting work, because that's all I was going to get. I mean, I had no illusions of working as a photographer. But he hooked me up with a lot of really good photographers as soon as I got to New York. So when we did move here, within the first couple of weeks, I had worked for Arthur Elgort and Patrick Demarchelier, just because Elite said there's a guy in town, you get, take him on as like the fifth assistant on the left, and he'll just hold a pick stand or something. And the idea was, I mean, again, I moved here with a model. I loved the whole idea of being a fashion photographer. So I figured I'm going to be a fashion photographer. And within 6 months, I realized there's no way I'm going to be a fashion photographer.
Why is that?
You're either a fashion photographer or you're not, and the best thing for me was that I recognized that very early on. I mean, if you work for fashion photographers and you see what it's like, and if you want that to be your life, go with God. That's great. I knew I couldn't hack it. I mean, it wasn't about the photography. It was more just the whole way things got done.
It's like big personalities and stuff, right? Like,
well, yeah. I mean, I certainly met those people. Big personality people. Yeah, you meet them, and the insecure personalities and all the support staff and all. It's a weird business, man. I mean, I'm not talking out of school to say there's a lot of nuts in fashion, and unless you want to live fashion. And the other thing is, I saw in the first 6 or 8 months that I was here, I saw great fashion photographers, guys that were better at fashion than some of the designers they worked for. I mean, they absolutely knew it. And I'm including guys like, Elgort and Demarchelier and Albert Watson and Rebecca Blake, people that they would see the clothes, they would know what would look good, they would understand it. I was never that guy. I mean, I would, and if you're not going to be that, that focused on what you're doing, it's probably best to realize that early on and get out. And not, I could have done it. I could have been a very passable fashion photographer. I mean, it wasn't about technique or anything like that. It was just, I couldn't see myself waking up after 20 or 30 years and looking back at my career of being a middling fashion photographer. It just didn't seem to jive. And
looking at your work, the thing that's cool about it, and you get to photograph so many different types of people. It's not just like, it's not fashion, it's like business people, it's musicians, it's athletes, it's like scientists or whatever, and it's across the board. And it just seems like, for me, like, that's the thing that's interesting thing about photography, is getting to meet all these different people. And it's like, I guess unless you love fashion, it would get really monotonous, I think, if you're shooting the same type of like person and kind of subject matter,
Well, again, that took a long time, because at the same time I realized, I had this moment of clarity that I'm not going to be a fashion photographer. I was breaking up with the model girlfriend, And I didn't know what I was going to do. You know, I didn't want to keep on assisting fashion guys just to make a living, because there's no living. I mean, at that time you're working for, you know, anywhere from 50 to 75 bucks a day.
Damn.
And, you know, you're living in New York, everything you're making is going to pay rent and food and everything else. So the girlfriend and I are breaking up. I don't know what I want to do with my career. So I just started working for everybody. I mean, I had a pretty good network of people, that I could get work with other people, but I worked for everybody from, you know, architecture guys to car guys. I mean, just anybody that had a gig, I was available, and I was a good assistant. So I got a lot of work, despite, you know, not wanting to do manual labor. It all sort of worked out. But then, and I was also sending out resumes to people who I really did want to, you know, explore. And those were the guys that, again, going back to when I was a kid, I knew these names. I knew names like Co Rentmeester and Dave Burnett. And at that time, they were the people at Time Life, you know, all the Time in Life photographers. And I was sending out resumes, and I got a call. I'd met this one guy. So the guy who ended up being my mentor was Enrico Fiorelli. He was shooting for Life magazine and Time and Fortune, and, you know, and I met him, I think it was probably like late September, early October of '83. And, or was it 82? Yeah, 83 probably. And never heard a word. And then one day, like early January of the next year, I get a phone call at like 8 o'clock at night. Are you available tomorrow? We have to, you know, I got to get, I said, yeah, sure. Okay, meet me at my apartment at 4:30 in the morning. We're flying to Providence, Rhode Island. And we got to be ready to go. So I'm like, okay, great. Get to his place at 4:30. Get to LaGuardia. We've got a 6 a.m. flight to fly to Providence. I get to his apartment, and he's got a stack of gear that I'm like, what are we shooting? And it's just him and me. I mean, we had giant anvil cases of strobes and 2 cases of stands and, you know, 3 camera bags. And we get to LaGuardia, and we're flying some little puddle jumper flight from LaGuardia across the Sound to Providence.
Yeah, it's like 20 minutes.
Like, how are you going to get this on that? We're going to weigh down the plane. We get to Providence. We went to Brown University, and we were shooting babies.
Wow.
For Life magazine. But it was like this very intense story on how babies learn with this Nobel Prize winning, you know, doctor. And so the day started at 4:30 in the morning. By the time it was a day trip. By the time we got home, back to his place, it was, I don't know, after 11 o'clock. And it was the most fun I'd had in the previous year on a shoot. I mean, it was like, there was nothing, there were no art directors, no photo editors, nothing. It was just him. Go find pictures, go make pictures. And we had a great time.
Yeah.
You know, like he didn't know what he was getting into. I mean, he had a vague outline of what this story was about. And that's typically the way things work even now. I mean, you don't know everything when you get in. You just sort of, okay, this is, you know, go make a picture, go make the story. So that one day, and because we hit it off pretty well, led to my big hookup at Time Inc. I mean, I ended up working for Enrico from, I think my time might have been wrong. It might have been the end of '82, because I think it was the end of the first year. So it would have been '83. I assisted with all those guys up at Time Inc. I mean, I worked for just about everybody at Life magazine until I really went out on my own, which was, you know, at the end of '86.
Yeah. And what was it like working like a photo assistant back then? Because obviously you guys are shooting film. Like, how different was the job of a photo assistant back then versus now, you think?
It's a good question. I mean, the guts of the job are the same. I think it was, in a lot of ways, it was a lot more work, a lot harder, a lot longer days, because, you know, you'd finish jobs and you would have to run film to the lab, come back with the clip tests, go back and run the stuff. I mean, you were sort of tasked with being there a lot of times to help out afterwards. And then you worked for guys that just thought, okay, a day of work is from here to here, and you're going to work the whole day. Even if the shoot lasted an hour and a half, the guy would have you cutting mats or cleaning the studio for the next 6 hours, just because he's going to get a day of work out of you. I mean, that was normal.
Yeah.
That shit doesn't happen now. I mean, my assistant.
No, that does. I've had that happen recently to what client I've worked with. They do that shit. It's fucking brutal.
My assistants love me, man, because they know they're going to probably meet me at the gig. and then we'll shoot the gig, and then they'll say, okay, give me a bunch of money, I'm going home, and that's it. I'm taking the gear back to my place, I'm doing all the stuff. But the other thing is just the post work, right? I mean, with digital, it's not the same. It's not like you don't have to worry about labs and all this other stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, that's one big difference. The other difference is it's, it's not like back then where you were traveling a lot. I mean, I was spending more than 6 months of my life on the road back then.
Yeah.
Up until the internet, up until even like getting into like 97, 98, my whole business model was get on a plane, fly to a place, make stories. And that was after I figured out what I wanted to do, after I started shooting my own stuff. But even as an assistant, back then, I went around the world with these guys.
Yeah.
I mean, Enrico and I went to Europe, we went to Australia, we went, it was like, you had budget. I mean, you would get gigs where you would literally go away and then it would be ongoing. Like we went to Italy once. Was it Italy first? Yeah. We flew to Italy. We shot this huge gig for Exxon for their annual report. While we're there, magazines are calling them saying, hey, can you go to Spain? Can you go to Scotland? We ended up extending our trip a month just to shoot magazine gigs in Spain and Scotland. I nearly got divorced. I mean, it was like, I had just gotten married. I just got married in 85 and I was gone for, 2 months. It was supposed to be like a 3-week gig.
Yeah, because that's why I definitely read about, and like I remember in photo school, some of my professors, they would always talk about like annual reports, and it seemed like such a good avenue to go down. Like I don't really hear too many people shooting annual report stuff anymore for the most part. But that seemed like
rub it in.
Yeah, but back then that seemed like that was like basically getting like an ad gig, right? Like if you could shoot an annual report for like a big company.
Well, yeah, and that was one of the things. And look, it hasn't changed. If you're an editorial photographer, you'd better have some way of making real money.
Mm-hmm.
But even back then, especially back then, I mean, Time Inc. paid $350 a day. Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like it's so much more now, but you can't live in New York on $350 a day.
No.
You have to have a licensing network set up so you could sublicense your images. You have to have ways to make money, which is either advertising or corporate work. And that's just what it always has been. I mean, if the one thing about this past year, all of my corporate work pretty much is just here. It just vaporized because there's nobody in the office. There's nothing happening. Like the annual reports that I've done for years at this time right now, like this is annual report season from January through March, April. I would normally be up to my ass in corporate gigs.
Wow.
It's a big chunk of change that just disappeared. It started last year. I mean, we shot a couple in January and February, and then we had stuff canceled from March through June. I mean, it was just, and it ain't coming back. I mean, it's not coming back now. It didn't come back this year.
Yeah, it's gonna. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, because I've lost a lot of even my editorial clients. Now they're like it's more like the regional stuff. They're relying more on like stock imagery, or like they'll even like one of the magazines I used to shoot for all the time. They'll say they're photographing a chef or something. They'll just ask the chef like, "Hey, do you have an existing photo of yourself we can use?" Because those regional magazines, they depend on local advertisers to advertise, and it's like the local restaurants and whatever businesses can't even advertise in those magazines anymore. So it's like, yeah, all those assignments are gone now.
I've still got clients that aren't shooting anything indoors even now.
Yeah,
That all of their photographers have to shoot outside. You have to, and then I've got clients that are saying, and you can't specify that you have to follow any kind of suggested protocol. Like, so I've got some clients that say you can't take a gig if they insist you have to have a COVID test ahead of time, because that would imply that they're getting into your healthcare. I'm like, okay, well, it's just, there's so many things that you have to wrap your head around these days just to get a picture taken.
Oh, yeah.
Look, I mean, we're getting it. We're skipping a lot, but in the past year, since March 10th last year, I shot 6 gigs.
Yeah.
That's it. Normal month, that's an average okay kind of month for me. 6 gigs since March 10th. And some of them, most of the 6, I think 4 of the 6 were good paying, jobs. But so what? I mean, they would have been there anyway. Those same good paying jobs would have been there in a normal year anyway.
Mm-hmm.
This is no joke. Like you said, you've got clients that aren't hiring you. I've got clients that are literally out of business. I mean,
yeah,
design companies that are gone, magazines that have folded, other magazines that have gone full digital, which means you'll never see them again, you know?
Yeah, it is crazy. I don't know. Hopefully we get back on track with the vaccine and stuff, and but who knows? I think it's gonna be it ain't gonna be overnight, that's for sure. But I was trying to stay in their game, but
I,
it gets tougher by
I,
the year.
I do have, it is picking up. I've got a corporate shoot next week for one of my regular things because and this is going to be a bunch of portraits of executives. Thank God, because again, a good paying job and from a regular client that isn't going away. So
Yeah, definitely. So, how do you kind of start shooting your own assignments? Obviously, you're assisting all the life guys, and were you kind of working on your own portfolio on the side? And like, how did you who were kind of some of the first clients and assignments you started getting once you kind of started working for
I,
yourself?
yeah, this is one of those things that doesn't happen anymore, at least not the way it did back then. I was hooked up with, like I said, just about every magazine and photographer that worked up at Time Inc. Most of the Time and Life guys.
Mm-hmm.
So when it came time, and like literally, I had my own magnetic card key to get into the Time Inc. building because we're coming and going all the time. We're going up to the 20th floor and getting gear and the lab and everything. We were there all the time. So when it came time to make a move, because I was working a lot with Enrico Ferrelli. I was working with Co Rentmeester. I worked with Heisler. I worked with Marielle and Mark. They all pretty much knew it's time to take off, go do your own thing. Especially Enrico. Enrico pushed me out, a couple of times. No, get out, go do your own thing. So it forced me to get my own book together because it was hard at the time because when you're working so much, you don't even have time to shoot your own stuff.
Yeah,
I was working 7 days a week. And then when you're on those road trips, it was hard just to get some gigs, get some of your own shooting off. The places where I actually got some really good stuff that was in my initial portfolio, I was working for Eric Miola and Pete Turner and Al Satterwhite. These guys, I don't know, do you know these guys?
Oh yeah, Pete Turner for sure.
Okay, well, there were guys like, these are the guys like when I was young, you pick up Pop Photo and American Photography, and their images were on the cover all the time. Those Bowen's Illumitron duped sun over the pyramids, and like Miola did all that stuff, and a guy named Mitchell Funk and Al Satterwhite, they did all this stuff, and going on jobs with them, they were in pretty exotic locations. And there were some jobs I did where you're on the location on that guy's dime and you get to take some really cool pictures on your own.
Yep.
So you pull out the Kodachrome 25 and you get, you see some weird dude walking down the street, you take a portrait of him and boom, it's in your book, right?
Yeah.
And where are you? In some weird place with bright colors and crazy shit. And so my first portfolio, despite the fact that I was working for all these editorial, photo essayists, it looked very bright, poppy, super saturated, very Pete Turner, Al Satterwhite kind of stuff. But it had a look. And the weird thing was it was all portrait based. But when I got pushed out and I started having to think about getting jobs, I showed that around. I take it up to the Time Inc. people. I said, oh, we didn't know you did this kind of stuff. That's cool. Great. Okay. Out of nowhere, the photo editor at Life magazine gives me a big job to shoot on this 200th anniversary of the Constitution issue. And it's all still life. It has nothing to do with what he calls me in and says, we want you to go to 10 states in 2 weeks and shoot all these historical societies and private collections and museums. And this is what you got to shoot. And you got to have it back here in this day. And here's a bunch of money. And here's a reporter to go with you. And you get an assistant in the truck and a bunch of gear. I'm like, oh shit. And I'm like, I don't want to do this. I told this friend of mine, he says, are you out of your mind? They're going to send you out for 2 weeks just to shoot, like little, paintings and tchotchkes and pots for you. Go nuts. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll do it. And when that issue came out, I was suddenly completely legitimate in the Time Inc. building.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that I'd showed all these people this bright, poppy, crazy stuff, I'm in this very conservative 200th anniversary of the Constitution issue. And suddenly I'm getting phone calls to shoot stuff. for Time magazine and for all the Time magazines. I was working for them based on that one special issue of the Constitution.
Were they hitting you up to shoot more still life stuff, or?
Well, Life started me doing that. Like right after that, my next gig was, there was this little girl that got murdered by her father, Lisa Steinberg. This is going back to, I don't know what year that was, had to be 87 maybe. And they had me camp out at their house in the village and shoot the shrine that was that was taking place outside of this house. And again, because it was Life, they want everything. There was this whole stigma about shooting 8x10. Well, not a stigma. It was sort of like they pushed you to shoot 8x10 or 4x5. It was like you would work for these guys. Like you'd show up on a job for Heisler. He'd have everything from a wide lux camera to an 8x10 Sign RP that you would take out to the gig, and you would shoot all of that stuff. And Rico did the same thing. Like, oh, we're taking the 8x10 today. Said we're shooting a portrait. Oh, we're taking the 8x10. Like, okay. So I thought I have to go out there with large format. So I go out there with a 4x5, and it's like snowy and rainy and shitty, and I'm standing out there with a bag over my head, and I'm shooting this little shrine of this thing that's happening outside this house. And I got this picture of these candles glowing and people putting flowers down, and it was really close up with a wide angle lens, and it ran in Life magazine. And again, boom, it was like, it was one of those things. And then it syndicated because it was that kind of picture, so it goes around the world. And then I start building this thing up where I'm a photographer that people think they know based on these pictures. And yeah, I did start getting that kind of stuff, like still lifey kind of things. They sent me down to DC to shoot the gun that shot Reagan. And then I came back to New York and I shot the gun that shot John Lennon. And it was like,
wow,
okay, turning into Life magazine's still life guy. And to break out of it, I said, I got to shoot my own photo essays. I got to shoot my own stories. So I started doing little things around my neighborhood. I lived in Brooklyn at the time. Me and another photographer put together a thing called A Day in the Life of Greenpoint. We lived in Greenpoint, and we got like 25 other photographers, and we did a Day in the Life project. And it was, I just remembered, it was when Day in the Life in New York was happening. It was people that didn't get invited to go on Day in the Life in New York. Like all these people that we knew that were like, oh, shit, we didn't get on Day in the Life. So we do Day in the Life of Greenpoint.
That's awesome.
And so I shot that. I got some cool stuff on that. And then I shot, this was the other big one that got me into the Times. I shot a story on the Animal Medical Center. The animal hospital actually, you don't know, there's a huge animal hospital. It's a teaching hospital on the like East 60th Street. And I spent a couple of months shooting overnight in the emergency clinic, people bringing their sick animals into this place. And I'd get there at like 8 o'clock at night, and I'd leave around 4 a.m. And that was the crazy time. Because in New York, most people are at work during the day. They come home and their dog and cat is sick and they race to the hospital. And I put this photo essay together after a couple of months, and I take it to Life magazine and I show it to the photo editor at Life. And he looks at it and goes, oh, this is great. This is great. This is great. But we just ran a story on a veterinary story. We shot James Harriet, the old Creatures Great and Small guy. We can't have two vet stories right now. It's completely different. I mean,
yeah.
Picture of an English veterinarian running through the hills and dales of Wales with a sheep, or it's a woman bringing her bloody dog in that just got hit by a car and is screaming and crying. And so I'm like, oh shit, what am I going to do? So I shotgunned it out to everybody I could think of in town, including the New York Times. And Kathy Ryan made a photo essay out of it for the magazine.
Damn.
Which was, again, total shift. And it just moved me. Now I'm shooting photo essays.
Okay.
Like, no plan. I mean, it was like, I didn't think I was going to be shooting photo essays, but like overnight, suddenly I start getting back into closer to what I wanted to do, which was shoot people. But then I start shooting for Time and Newsweek and Business Week and, Forbes and those types of things, which are more, photo stories. They were more portrait driven, but they were at least photo stories.
Mm. And, like looking at your work, it's like portrait based. Like in your mind, like what makes a good portrait, and like how do you approach portrait photography? And is it like something that your approach has changed much over the years, you think?
When I started, and which was, when I stopped assisting and started shooting, this was right when most like certainly celebrity portraiture was getting run by management and by publicists and things like that. So the idea that you're going to have a lot of time with somebody was already coming to a close. The idea that you'd be able to develop a great rapport and hang out for a couple of days, that was already done. If you weren't working for Vanity Fair, it ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
So, but I worked for a lot of people that I saw how you would be able to develop that instant connection, whether it was, telling a joke or doing a little bit of research and finding out something about them. And again, this is pre-internet, so you had to sort of do a little bit of work. And not just celebrity, but even business people, because the one thing I did start doing from very early on was working for business magazines. So you'd find out what the person was all about, where they worked for before, or what they did, or a little bit about their own business. So at least that first 30 seconds that you had when you met them, you could drop something in that shows that you're at least interested in what they do enough that they're not going to just think, okay, it's the photo guy, let's get this over.
Yeah.
And really you're talking about, if you can't get them within the first minute or two, a lot of times they just check out. I mean, anybody, you really have to have some kind of a connection. So I've always done, enough work before the shoot to get me at least the knowledge of the person I'm doing, or some knowledge of the person I'm doing, that I have something that I can talk to them about. Yeah. It's almost impossible to go in and just say, okay, here's my fancy idea how I want you to do something. And again, that's part of the business too, because even going back to when I first started in the Life magazine shoots, you were already imposing your idea on people back then. Like my idea of what Life magazine was when I first started was, oh, you're going to go into this amazing stuff and it's going to be this big collaboration. It's never that way. I mean, the amount of times you actually collaborate with somebody on a magazine editorial shoot, I could hold in my hand.
Yeah. It's all up to you. I think it froze there. Did I lose you there?
And is out there, and sometimes they work, and sometimes you'll just get shot down. Most of the time, you don't get shut down. I mean, celebrity stuff, more often than not, you got to come up with 20 ideas before you can get in the door, run it past the manager, and they'll shoot down most of them just right off the bat.
Yeah. I was going to ask you that. You mentioned like the business stuff you do. And I think for me, like anybody who can like photograph business people well is like such a skill, because a lot of times, as you know, you're this photographing them in some like boring office, like cubicle country, and you can't really rely on the location so much. So like, how do you approach those like business shoots and walk away with like a compelling photograph? Because I mean, I've done a lot of it myself, and I find it it is a challenge, but it's looking at your work, you've done some really cool stuff for like Barron's. I think you did like you did it for over 10 years on your website, like the Barron's Roundtable. But like, how do you approach those like business shoots, I guess?
Well, the Roundtable is a whole different animal.
Yep.
That's a photo composite nightmare. I mean, I'll talk about that, but the basic business shoots. I mean, look, I'm a lighting guy. I've always been a lighting guy from day one. I mean, and even before I started assisting, even when I still lived in Canada, I liked playing with light. So, and I know what I can do with it. If you get into a boring situation, I got 20 tricks that I can make with light to make a boring beige room a little bit more interesting. And you get into that all the time. When you go into a business office, it's not like you're walking into an Oliver Stone film that looks like Wall Street and you get this amazing view or this fantastic architecture.
No.
I mean, 98% of the time it's you walk in and your eyes glaze over and go, shit. Oh, what do we do? It's like, and the people around you too, they'll go, okay, well, here's what we've got. He'll be here in an hour.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, you're standing next to the water cooler,
yeah,
like
they'll
shit on the ground.
or they'll say, well, we've had photographers here before and we shoot here. I'm like, well,
yeah,
that's the place where I'm not going to go because it's already been done to death. So then you have to sort of think, all right, what can you do? But as a lighting guy and as a guy that knows how you can, shape and change reality, I don't get that freaked out anymore. I mean, even if it's just, if I have to pull out a lighting trick, and I put that in quotes, at least it gets me out of that boring situation.
Yeah.
I mean, without thinking of specific pictures, I also don't like that kind of gotcha picture. The one where you see the guy looking like he's just completely ill at ease in his own situation, because that's easy. You can always make a guy look like a deer in the headlights in some, and that's the thing. Some magazines want that. They want to see what they think is the reality of a banal situation. They want you to put the guy in the, in his environment. But then the one that the photo editor will always choose is the one where the guy's sort of staring off like, why am I here? And I've never been able to really wrap my head around that picture as a style. Yeah. I know there are guys that do it and do it very well, and it's very striking. But I like you said, I tend to get hired to make people look good, and I think I can do it. So, and I don't want to make people look bad. I mean, that goes back to when I was in high school. I mean, I started taking pictures to sort of make friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went from that to being a photojournalist where I was shooting real stuff. And now I'm shooting, sort of made up portraits of business people, but there's a purpose to it. I mean, you're not often hired to go into an office and make a guy look bad.
Yeah.
There are those stories where it might make sense, but I'm typically not the guy that they hire for that picture. There are people that do it far better than me.
And in terms of like lighting, like obviously you've been doing this for a while. Do you think, like, being that you're working commercially, editorial, do you have to pay attention to like photographic trends and like what certain magazines are publishing, like to stay relevant? Do you think you have to like kind of pay attention to what the style of the day is, or like what's your kind of thought? Because I see a lot of trends like in the last few years, like gels came back real heavy and all types of stuff, and then some magazines are shooting a lot of film, so there's different trends you see. Like, what's your kind of opinion? Because you've probably seen these trends change from decade to decade, I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, I will say that my own style has certainly evolved over my career.
Yeah.
I think the best time I've had has been when, in the past 15 years since more than that, I guess, since I started shooting digital, I enjoy the control I have over digital shooting. I mean, not that I didn't like film. I loved a lot about film. I made an entire section of my career wrap around shooting Polaroid negatives, and doing that, carrying buckets around so you could process negatives on the field and shit like that. And I got hired to do, major campaigns doing that stuff. But as things changed, I mean, I've never really thought about stylistic things like that as a way to change my career.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen things happen. I've seen styles come and go. I've never really had a big plan on the way my work looks to follow somebody else. But then I look back at stuff and I see, oh yeah, a lot of people were doing that kind of thing. Like in the 80s, everybody put like a 3/4 CT gel over the main light, and everybody looked like they were sitting underneath a heat lamp.
Yep.
I look back at some of the shit I shot in the late 80s, and I'm like, what was I thinking? You have that bright orange skin tone with a blue kicker, and you're like, oh my God. So yeah, I mean, you get influenced by stuff around you, but I never really thought that is the way to go. I did know that back like around the middle part of the 90s and into the early 2000s, I never had a specific look that you could say, oh, that's a Brad Trent picture. And my reps pointed that out to me because I was a very hard rep. I mean, they could take my book in and they'd get great response, but it wasn't the same thing again and again and again and again. Mm-hmm. So if they were trying to get me a campaign, it was a lot harder than a lot of photographers at the time who did the same thing. Like there were guys that shot with, their whole thing was an octalight. You put an octalight up, whether it's in a studio or at sunset, that's his look. And you knew that was that guy's look. You could see it a mile away and the client would know exactly what he was going to get. Yeah. If I had focused on that kind of thing, maybe I would have done more ad work back then. But, I like I said, as a lighting guy, I'd get into something and I'd see how to solve the problem a different way. Plus, it was a little more exciting than doing the same thing over and over again. I actually had an assistant once tell me, why don't you just do this? We do this really well. Yeah. And I said, tell you what, you do it. You make a career out of it. I can't do the same thing.
Yeah.
Again and again.
Yeah, man.
So yeah, styles and trends and things, I've certainly seen them coming. I saw the whole filtery bullshit come back again, and it makes my head spin. I'm like, there are people that think this is new. I'm like, no, it's not new. It's not
No,
new.
no,
You know,
definitely.
and dragging the shutter. I mean, my God, and they don't even do it well. I mean, I can see somebody now, like their whole reason for being is that they'll have a picture where they do a long drag on the shutter so that there's like a hot light and the strobe, and boom, that's the look. I'm like, you can do that once or twice or 10 times, but if you do keep on doing it, it's just like, all right, what are we doing next? I mean, where's the soul of this picture?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
definitely. I think
For me,
for me,
what's again echo there? Yeah, good light and good composition at the end of the day. That's all you need. Like you don't need all the tricks and whatever. I mean, whatever. If people want to do it, it's fun, have fun with it. But yeah, sometimes I look at it, I'm like, why are you actually doing that? Is it because you think you're gonna get hired for using it, or do you actually enjoy it? And because sometimes I think myself, because those months where you don't got a job and you're like, damn, what do I need to do to get the next job? Should I start partaking in the gel stuff or whatever drag shutters? So it sometimes can be a real mind fuck,
Look, I get it. I mean, I see what is getting hired now. I
Yeah.
see the kind of pictures that get published, and I would think as a young photographer now, it'd be very hard not to fall into that hole.
Yeah.
If you see that, okay, this guy's getting all the work and he's doing this, maybe I should do that. The problem with that is, if it's not what you're into, you're never going to pull it off right. I mean, it's very hard to pull off somebody else's style for the rest of your life just because that happens to be the flavor of the moment.
Definitely.
And over the years, people that do their own thing are the ones that have the longest careers, and those are the ones that they look. I mean, I don't even know how you get going in photography these days. There's an art directors. You can't get in to see them. If you have to pay, a couple of grand to do portfolio reviews just to get some face time, my God, that's tough enough.
Yeah.
I know the viewers that do the photo reviews too. I mean, I know them. These are friends of mine, and they go, yeah, I sat down today for 10 hours and I saw 50 guys, and I don't know, my eyes glazed over after the fourth book, and that's the people that you're paying all this money to go see.
Yeah, and I've done them, and I've talked to editors who I'm friends with, and like I think some of those people doing the reviews are open to finding new people to hire, but I think a lot of the people, the reviewers, go into it and they're not even thinking about hiring these people. They think like they're just there to get advice about their work, which yeah, true. Some people are looking for that, but
Yeah,
I think
the end game is always you want to get hired. So
yeah,
you'd better bring your A game and have these people really get blown away.
yeah,
And if the people are just sort of there thinking that they're just there as a sounding board, you're screwed. I mean, you're going to pay a lot of money to get, and that's the problem. You can't get into magazines and see people anymore.
yeah,
And if that's, because how else are you going to get hired? I mean, there's a lot of good photographers out there, man. There's tons of good photographers. You can't spit without hitting another great guy that can take a great picture.
There's a
And
new one
if
every day.
that's the case, then how do you get people to hire you if you can't get them to meet you and realize that you're the guy that can handle this gig? I'm glad I'm turning into an old man now because I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, especially this year, it's been the challenge because, like, I don't know, my experience, I've been doing this for like 12 years now, and it's like all the jobs I got were just from meeting people in person, and they kind of get a sense of your personality, and that's kind of what's worked for me. But now it's like, yeah, you can't meet people in person, so it's like trying to like navigate this weird world of like marketing your work in a time when you can't meet people.
But yeah, I can count on probably one hand the number of jobs I've gotten without ever meeting somebody.
Yeah.
Like it just, I don't know. I guess it happens. I guess it happens if your whole thing is you've got an Instagram account that has, tens of thousands of followers and people want to throw a dice and get you a gig. But I also know photo editors that have done that have hired people based on what they've showed, and they've been very disappointed. I mean, you can't tell what a photographer is going to be like on an actual job based on their portfolio. You just can't.
Yeah, because you're just seeing the highlights, and you don't know how they're gonna
Yeah.
approach this.
And this goes back to the type of work that most photo editors have to dole out. It's not like you have the luxury of time. You don't have days to get a picture or even hours to get a picture. You're shooting Bob at 5 o'clock, and at 5:15, Bob's leaving the set. Okay, well, you got 15 minutes to come back with, your cover, your opener, and a table of contents picture.
Yep.
Go to town. you know?
And a lot of times the budget, like, a lot of shoots I do, it's like there's not even a budget for assistant a lot of times. So it's like you have to like
Well, yeah,
think
you
about.
mentioned film earlier, film is a trend again. For
Yep.
who? I don't know a photo editor that has a film budget anymore.
Yeah.
If you call up a magazine and say, well, I do film, well, magazines typically say, that's great. Knock
Yep.
yourself out. We got $1,000 bottom to top. That's it.
Yeah. They're not paying for the film, but they'll print it because
I'm glad to do it, but it's on you.
it was interesting because I did a portfolio review back in October. They had the SPD one, and one of the photo editors I met with, I forget which magazine, but she was like all about film. She's like, I love that our photographers shoot film, and I was like, that's cool. I mean, but to me, I don't know. Like, I don't really care if a picture is shot on film. To me, it just kind of goes back to the same thing. It's like interesting subject, good composition, good light. Like I don't know. I don't get really bogged down by like the film aspect of stuff, but
I've never been that way. And honestly, after I figured it out, it took me a few years to really get my digital chops down.
mhm.
I won't go back. I
No.
haven't shot a piece of film in so long I can't even remember. I gave away my last bricks of frozen film like 10 years ago. I mean, they were just sitting there in the freezer. I'm like, well, here you go. Take all my Velveeta. Knock yourself out.
Yeah. What
I mean,
kind of
the one thing I honestly do miss though is Polaroid. I mean, I hate not being able to that Polaroid does not exist, that it's not in the world anymore, that you don't have, type 55 negatives to mess with. And so
that's the one. I could go without the rest, but type 55, that's the one that one really hurt. That really stung, man.
yeah, and I did there was a time when I would take out, we'd go on a gig and you would take 10 or 15 packs of black and white Polaroid for a gig that had no intention of ever printing in black and white.
Yeah.
Just that you could shoot those Polaroid negs for yourself and then spend the weekend in the darkroom making some cool prints.
Mm.
And honestly, that was the one thing I did for myself, even, my entire career. And that's the one thing that got me more other work than anything else. You would show that stuff and people they ate it up. It was like, never saw it in print. Very rarely you would see one of those weird black and white, twisty, messed up things in print.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's a different world now. One shoot I wanted to talk to you about, I really enjoyed it. You photographed Patti Smith at Penn Station, and for anybody who's ever been to Penn Station, that place is a freaking zoo. So when I saw that photo, man, I had to hear the backstory because that must have been fucking nuts.
Well, yeah, I mean that story's it's taken on a life of its own. It's like legendary and how messed up it was. We had that gig months in advance. Like my photo editor friend, Rob Smith, our art director, called me up and he said, he just on the phone, answer the phone, Patti Smith. I'm like, seriously? When? Yeah, whatever.
So who did you shoot that for?
It was for Arrive, which is it's the magazine that's on the Acela train.
Yep.
And so I'd worked for this guy for years. I mean, he's been at a bunch of different magazines, but then at that time he was at Arrive, and we had done a lot of good stuff with him. We shot Seth Meyers, we'd shot Misty Copeland, and this Patti Smith gig. I'm like, wow, okay, what are we doing? He says, well, we want to, it's up to you. We want something kind of urban looking, maybe a little grungy, maybe go nuts. So I'd found a studio out in Queens, in Long Island City. And he needed both studio stuff and he wanted some location things. Maybe it was just a nice urban feel. So this place was in Long Island City and it was really cool. We booked it, months in advance. I think we had like almost 3 months.
Mm.
And a month before the shoot, Patty's manager calls and says, yeah, Patti doesn't want to cross a bridge. Can we do this at Industria? Because she lives, in the village. She's like, I just like to walk to work. I'm like, okay, so now Industria is fine. Shoot there all the time. It's not that urban grunge that we were going to get in this other place. This other place had this old beat up boiler room, and then there was an outdoor space and a nasty roof. And so, okay, we'll shoot in Industria. Brick wall, maybe down the street. Okay, fine. The week before the shoot, we have to confirm. So Industria calls, are we confirmed? I call the manager. Yes, we're confirmed. We're all good. I confirm the studio. The Friday before the shoot, and we're shooting on a Tuesday, she calls and says, Patti wants to shoot at Penn Station. I'm like, well, what? This has nothing to do with anything. Why? Well, she wrote, it was all tied in with her book, and she wrote her book while she was riding the train. So she thought this would be a great place to shoot because she'd be sitting in the departure lounge waiting for the train, and she loved the big board on the pen. Oh my God.
How often are like because obviously you're shooting celebrities a lot of time. Like how often are people like putting their input into the creative side?
Not like this. I
Yeah.
mean, you get cancellations or venue changes, but not for the reason that, well, she had a connection with the train. And she also thought that because it was for the train magazine arrived, that it would be a nice connect, like whatever she was thinking. This wasn't conveyed to me. Patti wants to shoot at Penn Station, make it happen on Friday when we're shooting on Tuesday. Now, I've shot in places like that, and I know what's involved. And so I called Rob, the art director. I said, okay, here's the story. He says, what? I'm like, okay. So we start making phone calls. And even though we have a connection with Amtrak, that doesn't mean we're just going to waltz into Penn Station with a film crew and start working.
Yeah.
So we had to get together on a conference call with about 20 people, everything from New York City police all the way up to Homeland Security.
Wow.
Just to secure this. And then we get on this conference call, and again, you've got all these people cross-talking and asking what this is for and all this stuff. And the manager from the Amtrak who's trying to push this thing through. And plus, it's photography. They don't get it. They don't know what I want to do or what we have to do. We have to get a cover, which we're going to drop a backdrop. We have to, do some location stuff. She wanted to see the departure board in behind. So we end up talking to all these people, saying that we're going to keep it very, very closed down. We'll take as little space as we can to do this. And we end up having the manager of Penn Station saying, why does we have to shoot John McEnroe's wife at Penn Station anyway? He thinks Patti Smith is Patti Smith. He doesn't even know who Patti Smith is.
What the hell?
And at that point, you heard a lot of people laughing and a lot of people sighing. And we were like, okay, listen, all we need is a little space where I can drop a little backdrop and another little space over by the departure lounge board. And I'll keep it. We're going to shoot with battery powered strobes, so we don't have to plug in and be in and out in, I said, an hour, which was total bullshit. There was no way we were going to be in and out in an hour, but I said an hour.
Yeah.
So they agreed. So we showed up on the Tuesday, and it was in, I think it was August. It was hot as balls. I mean, there's no air conditioning in that place. We get in there and we drop our backdrop and we set up another thing on like 10, 15 feet away by the departure lounge. And Patti's supposed to show up, I think, around 2:00, and we're all ready to go. And remember, we told them an hour, and we told them it was going to be a little tiny space. I mean, if you see the picture, the main picture,
I'll find it here.
It's a big space. I mean, we dropped a 7-8 foot wide background, and then we set up over by the departure lounge. And the manager for Penn Station was watching this whole thing on the security cameras, and he storms down. And this big barrel-chested guy who didn't know who Patti Smith was is screaming at us, "What's going on here? You said a small space and all this stuff." And I completely ignored him. I let Rob, the art director, handle him. I stayed away because I knew if I opened my mouth, I probably was going to lose everything. We were going to be screwed.
Yeah.
Rob was just walking him down, talking him down. Just here, come over here. I'll explain everything. And there was nobody there. That was the other thing. For some reason, there was nobody there. It was completely quiet.
Oh, wow.
We found out later it was because it was between trains.
Okay.
And it was the middle of the day. Just as Patti shows up, like 5 trains came in.
Yep.
So now the entire place is filled with people. There's people everywhere, coming up, downstairs, walking around the backdrop, walking in between me and the wall and the backdrop. And just as we start shooting, like Patti comes in and she says hello, and she's fascinated. She said, "This is so great." She loves it. We show her the test picture. She's like, "This is exactly what I wanted." Take this picture. And just as I'm doing this one shot, this group of people come around from the side and they look over, and I got this one frame.
Oh, so this is real. This isn't like you didn't tell these people to.
And the funny thing is, the girl in the picture, the girl with the hat that's looking around the backdrop, we found out later, is a very famous jazz guitarist, a jazz bassist.
Oh, wow.
And a friend of mine, when this was published, said, "You know who that is?" And I said, "I have no idea." And he mentioned her name. And he said, "Yeah, she's pretty well known." So I find her on Facebook and I send her a picture. I say, is this you? And she gets in touch with me. She sends me back. She says, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you got in touch with me. I was in tears after I saw this."
Yeah, she's like, that's fucking Patti Smith.
She was literally the only person in Penn Station that knew who Patti Smith was, I think. People are walking by. Nobody gave a goddamn. They were like walking in between. Like they were pissed off that we were blocking the entrance to the train ramp. And yeah, it was a big deal. It was a very big deal. Very hard to pull off. Probably the most amount of drama I've had on a shoot in 15 years.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of the name of the game with your stuff especially when you're shooting like environmental portraits or whatever. It's like, whatever, do what you got to do to get the shot and then like apologize after if someone has like an issue with it, kind of, right?
Well, that's why I stayed away from the manager, because I'm okay, but maybe I'm not the most diplomatic person.
Yeah.
I could really see myself saying the wrong thing at that particular time, because in my mind, it's all over but the wet work. We've already set everything up. We're ready to go. Patti is literally 3 minutes away from showing up, and this guy is telling me to tear down my backdrop.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit concerned that because that could have easily happened. He could have said, "You know what? No, this isn't what I agreed to. You said an hour. You've already been here, pushing an hour and a half. Tear it down."
Yeah, definitely. It's you never know what you're gonna run into in this gig. I guess a couple more questions. I'll let you go. I don't want to take up your whole day. What kind of interests you these days? Like, what kind of, like, when you get the call for an assignment, like, what kind of stuff piques your interest most? Like, what are you kind of interested in photography wise these days, I guess?
I mean, for the stuff that well, let's put it this way. Like you mentioned it earlier. You said that I get to shoot everything,
Yep.
different people. It's not always the same thing. That's kind of why when I started working for, magazines, the interest level was brought back. Like when I thought I was going to be a fashion guy, I realized I didn't want to do the same thing all the time.
Mm.
When I started shooting for magazines, the best thing about it is that you never really knew what was going to happen from day to day. I mean, you could, and I've shot everything from, business people to presidents.
Yep.
I've been, Nobel Prize winners and celebrities. I mean, it's a great gig if what you like doing is meeting and talking to interesting people. So to say, what do I want to do next? I mean, I've been simplifying things a lot, taking that I'm a lighting guy thing down to just throwing up a 5-foot umbrella and doing Irving Penn style portraits, just getting a nice expressive portrait and spending more time with the person and not so much time on the technique and all the other mishigas that surrounds it. I mean, it's just, and the past few gigs I've done, aside from that variety cover you mentioned, have been very, very simple. I mean, I just shot a book cover where it was, the whole thing was one big light and model backdrops, and it was a great looking shoot. I mean, it's a lot of fun just spending time focused on the person and not so much on all of the stuff that makes the technique of the picture.
Yeah, definitely.
But who I want to shoot, or what would I like to do next? I just, I take what comes along. And that's kind of the cool thing about it. It's not to say I shoot everything. I mean, somebody said to me, "Is there anything you've turned down?" I turned down a lot because there's things I just know I won't do right.
That's interesting. So, like, when you turn down a job, what is it? It's just like the technical aspect, or what is it? Like, when you do turn down a job, what factors kind of come into that decision, I guess?
Very rarely technical. I mean,
Yeah.
some things that I know, no, you need a different kind of guy for that kind of gig. That's happened, but not so much. I heard I think your last thing with Dan, I heard that, and he was talking about that too, about, there are things he turns down because he doesn't want his own head to get in the way. I've done that.
Mm-hmm.
And after Trump got elected, I had a client of mine call me up, and she wanted me to shoot this Trump and the whole family thing. And there was no way I was going to get in that room, because I was also in the story. I was surprised she asked me, because I was, I know 2 women that were actually in the grab-e pile, and I was the backup for one of them. So, so I turned that down. She's like, "Well, I understand," and then she got another guy, very good photographer that I know, to do the gig, and he did just a fine gig of Trump and his kids, but I couldn't be in that room.
Yeah.
No way. I mean, I just, and there's been a couple of other people. It wasn't so much the personality that I didn't want to be in with. It was just what they wanted me to do. It wasn't so much my picture.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I get hired and somebody starts describing how they want to do something, and I see it's veering off into a lifestyle type thing, I'm not a lifestyle guy.
No.
I'm the guy to just, like Cheyenne will have his dog under one arm and
Yeah.
just, I'm not that guy to run and gun with that kind of thing. I mean, that's a different kind of photographer. I don't do that kind of thing. I'm much more controlled.
Yeah.
And occasionally they'll say, yeah, we want you to do this and this and this, and then just go outside and run around and do some lifestyle stuff. I'm like, well, no, that's nowhere near what I do.
Yeah, it's like its own skill set.
If you push me into it, yeah, I can do it, and then I'll probably have heartburn for 3 days.
Yeah, you gotta go with your gut, I guess. And one more. Yeah, you photographed Obama. You got to go to the Oval Office. I was just kind of curious, what was that for, and like, how was that experience?
Well, that was a highlight for sure. I'd already been in the Oval 3 times before that, twice as an assistant, and then I shot Clinton for a magazine right after his second term, like right after he got elected to the second term. So the getting into the Oval was I'd already done that. I already knew kind of what to expect, but this came up completely unexpected. I was off on a location scout in the Meadowlands. I was literally standing in the swamp outside of Giant Stadium and a bunch of 8-foot tall reeds when I get a phone call from my wife, who was at Business Week at the time, and everybody in the photo department, the art director, another photo editor, and they said, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm standing in the weeds." "What?" She's like, "Can you shoot Obama on Monday?" Friday afternoon at like 4:00. I'm like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, of course." And you think, okay, is he coming to New York? No, we're going to DC. And then you got to think of and then they say, it's not going to be a big setup. They're telling us it's just going to be while the interview's going on. The editor and the Washington bureau chief are going to be in the Oval with them, and you're going to have to shoot it while it's going on.
Yep.
But you're still thinking, okay, well, we'll still set up, like just a light on a stand and, or a stick, and we'll get something. So sure, we, very quickly have to get all of our documents together and send everything down to DC and get pre-approved and all that. And the funny thing was, we end up, as we're driving down to DC, it was Ronnie and me and my assistant. We're just passing Baltimore. And I said to my assistant, I said, "You got your passport, right?" Because I knew that his driver's license had expired. Like it had expired for like 3 years.
Yeah.
It just occurred to me, we got to get into the the White House. And what if he doesn't have valid ID? And he says, "No, what do I need my passport for?" I said, "You're going to the White House." So then for the last hour driving to DC, I'm thinking, oh my God, we're not even going to get in. And sure enough, we get to the security gate, and the Marine Guard's looking at his driver's license, which was expired 3 years earlier.
3 years? Holy shit.
And he looks at him, and he looks at me, and we're all on the list. They've already run our social security numbers, and we're not a threat and everything. But, it's that last little hump.
Yeah.
Sure enough, my assistant's sitting there with, and he looks at him, and he goes, "Okay, just go in. Just go."
Yeah.
But then, okay, so the shoot itself, when we get in, there was a big wait. I mean, tremendous wait. Like we were waiting in the press room for a couple of hours past our allotted time. And because he had a lot of stuff happening that day. He'd only been in office a few months, and it was like,
okay.
And he was up to his ass in actual world leading stuff, taking a picture and being interviewed for Business Week wasn't exactly that big a deal. So we got pushed. What I remember was a couple of hours. So now I'm thinking, oh, we're going to get like 5 minutes, total. They're just going to have him interviewed in the hallway. We go in, we sit down. We're supposed to, they said 10 minutes. We were there for 35 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And he was just, it was obviously the end of a very long day. He looked, a little beat down when he got in. in some of my pictures, and again, some of my pictures, you can see he's actually looking just tired. He's leaning over in the desk, and he's
I'll pull up my favorite one, dude. This one was so good.
Yeah, that's the assistant with the expired card. Exactly.
This holding up the color card, it is so good.
Well, the funny thing about that, like I do this thing where we throw in the color checker just as a goof almost on every single shoot we do.
Yeah.
And I've got an entire thing of light test on my website, and Bo comes in with the card to hold it in, and Obama reaches for it and says, "I can hold that," and Bo says, "No, I'm holding it."
Obama said he could hold it.
Oh yeah, he was gonna grab the Macbeth card to hold it himself, and I said, "No, it's okay." Bo wanted to be in the picture, so he ran into the picture and held the card just to get his own picture of himself with the president.
That's awesome.
Again, I'm thinking in my head, 10 minutes. We had set up a 7B Pro Photo and a little mini Octa on a stick. And I knew the Oval Office, and I knew the layout, and I knew where we could get a really cool portrait of him with no time. Like literally, we paced it off, and we knew if he stood back 8 feet from him holding this light, I knew what the exposure would be and everything else. And it just kept on going on and on and on. And 10 minutes was 20, and then 30, and finally at 35 minutes, the press guy comes in and says, "Okay, we really have to wrap this up." And so then I turn to the president and I say, "Oh, just one last thing. Do you think we can come over here? There's this wonderful portrait of these flags." "Oh yeah, sure." He gets up and he walks over and he stands there. The press guy says, "No, that's it. No more pictures." Like it was just like a bullet to the brain. It's like, and then of course we're there for another 10 minutes anyway, just hanging out. Pete Souza comes in and takes our picture. Like he had taken my picture with Reagan back when I was an assistant. And Pete comes in and, "Hey, Pete," and he actually he says, "Okay, I'll do this." I said, "Look, just use my camera." I handed him my 5D, and he took our picture with my camera, so we didn't have to go through all of the stuff of getting the auto-signed portrait from the White House.
Yeah.
Pete actually took our portraits with the president using my camera.
That's almost better. That's awesome.
I turned to him while he's taking the picture. I said, "Hey, if we're going to keep on doing this, why can I just get that one picture over here of my?" He goes,
"Oh, so you were still trying to get Obama to do it?"
Pushing, and he would have done it. And the press guy looked at me and gave me this stink eye and says, "No, get out of here." So
man, yeah, that is. Oh man, that's tough. But
a few stories like that over your life that you just go, just one more thing. If we had just cut the interview like 3 minutes earlier, I would have got that in. You know?
Definitely. Still a great story. But Brad, man, I could have talked to you for 5 more hours, man. But I'll let you go until we'll have to do part 2 or something. But real pleasure talking to you, man. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, it actually it went very quick.
Yeah, it was like an hour and 20.
Yeah, we can do the tech talk. Actually, we didn't get into a lot of shit, man. We didn't even.
We'll do one with the. We should do one with you, me, and Cheyenne, man. That'd be a rowdy one.
God help us. That'd be a nightmare. By the way, Cheyenne says just to make sure that everybody knows he's 5'5". Okay. He's
Cheyenne.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I've never met
that. I told everybody Cheyenne Esquire is 5'5".
All right, right on. All right, Brad. Well, thanks so much, and I'll tell everybody can go check out your website. It's just bradtrent.com, and then Instagram, same thing, just at Brad Trent, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
And a blog that hasn't been updated since COVID because I look at the blog. I'm like, I got to get going. I got like these 6 gigs I shot this past year. I should just put them all up on
there. You go.
The COVID catch-up blog post. Here, boom, go nuts. I'll put like a 5-page long blog post of just all the stuff I've shot in the past year.
Right on. Well,
thanks. I appreciate this.
Thank you, Brad. Take care, man.
All right, you too, buddy.
Bye. So there you have it. That was the Brad Trent interview. Just want to thank Brad so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. It was a real pleasure talking to him about his journey with photography. He's accomplished a lot and just done some really amazing stuff. Incredible portrait photographer. So definitely go check out Brad's work at bradtrent.com, as well as definitely go give him a follow on Instagram at Brad Trent. He's always posting up cool shoots and different projects he's working on. So definitely go give him a follow. And as always, I'll be having weekly podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, as well as the Photo Banter YouTube page. So definitely go check us out on YouTube. Hit subscribe, it'd be much appreciated. And as always, thanks so much for listening and take care.